Okay, so welcome to the encrypted world of Pacman, and welcome to the background noise of the opening ceremony, for starters. This is a seminar presentation I hold on bootlegging of arcade games, but it would be rude not to introduce myself first. Most people know me as Frankie. I organize little demo parties as TUM and Revision and Rewired when I'm not drunk. And since the last 2.5 years, I've also been restoring arcade cabinets, transforming them into multiplayer for MAME, and fixing them. And this is where most of this comes out of. You can follow me on Twitter, the interwebs, visit my shop and buy stuff. I don't mind at all. And you should know this. I really don't like PowerPoint, so this will be quite brief. And afterwards, ask me plenty of questions. It's my preferred way of doing stuff. But anyway, this is about the DRM of Pacman, and when we talk about digital right management in the 80s, we talk about bootlegging. Originally, bootlegging is the 1920s, 1930s with alcohol in the United States, so that's where the term comes from. But why is there any bootlegging in the first place? Because yeah, there has to be supply and demand. So first of all, you have the gray markets, which means that, say, you want to buy a Pac-Man game in 1982, 83, and Namco could only produce 10,000 a year, but there was a market for 25,000. So there's a gray market option for you, where people start to produce clones because they have their own factories, their own TVs, their own buttons, their own power supplies, etc. That's your gray market area. The lazy R&D is, well, I have this very good idea for a game, but I do not want to develop my own graphics chips, my own sound chip. I'll just use whatever is available, I'll abuse whatever is available, and do my stuff on that. And the cheap upgrades is, you need to know that also arcade games, like PC games, are built on a platform. The hardware, the graphics, the sound is reused for multiple games over the span of 18 to 24 months. So you say, well, I have game A, and I want to have game B because game A doesn't really work anymore. I want Pac-Man Plus instead of Pac-Man, but then I would have to pay Namco or whatever, or the Nintendos or the Segas, have to pay them lots of money, or I can just burn my own ROMs and plug them in. And I have epic win. That's your cheap upgrade. Now, this is a problem when things like an EPROM burner exist. And, well, this is the... When I typed EPROM burner PCB into the Googles, this was the second hit I got on the images. And it's not that hard. You can have USB versions today. Even in the 80s, this was pretty common. Of course, when you are Namco, Midway, Sega, Nintendo, you don't like this and you do not want people to use this, so you want to prevent this. But I promised a quiz for some people, so let's go. Guess the game. Enthusiasm, Finland? Come on, I didn't come all the way from Brussels to have like people here. What's this? Pac-Man, okay. What's this? Come on, repeat yourself. Okay, what's this? It says Pac-Man, yes. And this is Pac-Man, this is prêt. If you speak French, it means ready. Of course, this is not Pac-Man. These are 4 gray market clones of Pac-Man, because Namco couldn't provide them all and people jumped onto the gray market. If you want cheap R&D, there are 2 games here which throw out all the graphics, all the sound, but what they do keep are the code and the artificial intelligence. Now the second, the one on the right is called Piranha. It has no maze, it's one open field, so the ghosts, here replaced with jellyfish, will hunt down on you like madmen. And then they made a turbo version of it. And if you want cheap upgrades, You have one game and you reprogram it to act like Pac-Man. And of all the Pac-Man's clones that I have shown you, this is the only one which has the correct maze. Now for the record, this is Pac-Man. If you want the technicalities, the background layer is actually a character map, so it was quite easy to change in ROM to how you put your bands in your maze. And then the artificial intelligence of the ghosts would pinpoint at a certain location before or after left or right of Pac-Man, and then through whatever wizardry of calculus possible on an 8-bit CPU, send the ghost in that direction. Now, we have seen Pac-Man, but of course there is more to DRM. So there are several versions, methods used. Just list them up. Legalese, hardware tricks, software tricks, black blobs, encryption, suicide, and hardware keys. Yes, suicide. I didn't wear my Suicide Commando t-shirt, I forgot it, so sorry. So legalese. This is, well, just one company says, hey, I have something which is great in Japan, let's do it for the American market. And then you go, hey, Mr. Liars, can you draw up contracts and have this company called Midway, which we don't even know, just license it and do stuff, and okay, we give you money and we make Pac-Man, it's fine. Oh, this is a quiz, why won't this work? We have seen the result, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Nobody cares. So, people got into hardware tricks, and as you would say, oh, just put encryption on it and that's okay, but these are 8-bit CPUs, they are not strong enough for encryption. So what you do is you add things in the middle. An example here is the Atari Slapstick chip, which is like a portal. It switches memory banks very fastly. It sits in the middle between the CPU, the ROM, and the RAM. And if you would, through a cheap upgrade, copy the ROM chip, it would point the memory bank to the wrong position at the wrong time, and your game would crash. The other way, you could just pick off the slapstick and make a new one and put it in and just go on. So people got around it because the CPU is known. You can just read it. Okay, it's a Mustang Derivative 6800 or Motorola or a Z80. And you say, okay, that's the CPU. We know the memory bank. We can see to which pins this chip, security chip, is connected. And of course, as I said, there is no encryption. CPUs were not powerful enough for that. You can read the code and you can see what happens when and work around that. And put that in your own hardware design. And this is what happens towards the bootlegs of all the Atari games. It caused some delay, but didn't really help, and it's just an annoyance. But in the end, it was there. So, well, okay, if hardware doesn't work, we try software. And this is where you get into the home console world with cartridges. Each version, European, American, Japanese, has its own little memory map, which says, I can write to this part and I cannot write to that part. If you want to do a check, if you're running on the wrong version, you write into memory, and you expect an error because, well, that's read-only. If you get a feedback, everything's okay, you go into alarm and say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm an American game playing on a European console, please buy the original. Just emulate it. It takes some little R&D, you can see what happens when, and once you know the memory map of this is read-only, this is read-write, and this is write-only, just set it, emulate it, and that's where you go. But in home consoles, this was the 80s. Not really arcades, but console games. So then we have black blobs back into the arcade world. What we have here is a CPU a ROM and a RAM in one custom designed chip. The code inside does not travel over the memory bus, the CPU bus, everything is contained, but every important signal, like player start, inserting of coins, up, down, left, right, starting the music, goes through this chip. It sits in the middle of everything. It's a controller hub. Now, and you cannot access the code. That's important. So, quiz part, which game? Bubble Bobble. Did it work? Yeah, of course it didn't. We had Bubble Bobble, Bobble Bobble, and Super Bobble Bobble. Now, how you reverse engineer this is really textbook. You put a guy with the original chip in a room, and he writes an epic manual of manuals on it. He says, when you do this and that, when you do A and B, C comes out. When you do A and D, C accent comes out. And he writes a big manual, and he gives it to a second guy who gets the fun job of re-implementing the manual into an own chip. The second guy is called a virgin. He has absolutely no contact with the first one. That's for copyright reasons. If you do it like that, the lawyers cannot touch you. And this is how it was done. They looked at it. Well, okay, it looks like a Motorola CPU, so we'll go that way. And yeah, it kind of works. And okay, we have a copy board, so onto the market with it. That's how it was done, and it worked. And it worked that way until 5-6 years ago, when somebody actually took an actual bubble copy protection chip and put it under an electron microscope, and find out the actual core, and also that a lot of the code which was inside the chip wasn't even used. So a lot of security things never got finished, never got tested properly. They just left it out. But it also means that because the security chip handled the gameplay, the bootlegs actually played different than the originals. So if people say, yes, I'm the best bubble player in the world, 95% chance he played on a bootleg, and you can kick his ass on a real one. Keep that in mind if you ever make a wager for a crate of beer. So now we get into stronger CPUs. We can do encryption, decryption on the fly, which means that your ROM chips, your data is encrypted. And it gets decrypted by a key which is stored in a piece of memory inside the chip. And if the developers are smart enough, this key does not get sent over the bus, and you cannot read it with a logic analyzer. And put an algorithm to it. And some of these algorithms are so strong that, or the games are so unpopular that nobody cares, and they need to be decrypted still today. And that's the result that you will see. You will see wide fields because of unencrypted data. The game will mostly run, but it will be in your background graphics or in your sprite graphics that there is some encryption that initially they fool the bootlegger. Hey, I did it, it works. I can run this game and I can sell thousands of copies and get rich. And then in the third level, this happens. But again, with time and stronger computers, you just try brute forcing it. You have the ROM file, you can dump it on a PC and look for magic words. Every ROM made by Sega will say copyright Sega in it. That's the magic word you look for. And once you can read that, there's a pretty good chance you actually have the decryption key. And then go with that and see what happens. Maybe you need some tweaking, but once you can read Capcom, Nintendo, Sega, Midway, you're almost there. And then we got into the home console gaming again. Many console titles, they redid all the classic arcades. You have Street Fighter, and you have all the Tekkens, what for the PlayStation Network, for the Wii, and this includes the key, and also the algorithm used. And the protection for the PlayStation disc, the Xbox disc, the Wii disc, it's known. So you can just plainly read the code and the key because it's in there. And then, for some reason, is it lack of time or too much time, some versions shipped the factory unencrypted, which means you have a delta to start from, which can make your decryption work a lot easier. And then we get to suicide. This is basically the same as encryption, but the difference is your decryption key is not stored in ROM, programmed in flash memory. It is kept in RAM memory with a battery. If the battery dies, drops under a certain voltage, your RAM will say, I have no more power, I give up. And there goes your key, hence there goes your game. It committed suicide. Average lifespan of a battery 3 to 5 years. If you are very lucky, you might get 7 or 8. Yes, you can replace some of the batteries with soldering actions, and there are internet manuals, but still it's not for the weak of heart. But getting around is basically the same as with encryption. You look for magic words, you go with home consoles, you go with unencrypted versions. The only difference is that you have a time limit, and if you are lucky, you can use the unencrypted image which you just created to revive your dead PCB. A success rate about 50%. And then I've put in hardware keys. This is the Windows era. These are all the ugly touchscreen thingies you saw at bars in the late 90s. And they are no longer here and gone, and thank you random deity for that, and that's good. But what we have inside is a Windows PC with a dongle on it. It can be serial port, parallel port, USB. If you're lucky, there is the factory provided hardware encryption on your disk. And well, there isn't too much bootlegging here because it didn't last long enough. Most of these little puzzle games moved really quickly to mobile phones, and the time span in where this all lived and survived was too short to make room for a gray market or cheap R&D. If you should have one today, like a photo play or a multi-touch, and say, well, I want some new games in it, you can still get upgrades. You can go to your local reseller. It's here, it says multigame.biz, BIZ is a company in Holland. If you have, well, I have a photo play 98, I want a 2000 upgrade, they will happily ship you a disc, charge you 1,000 euros for it, and that's it. It's still available. And also, nobody really wants to emulate them. They are crap, and your mobile phone does way better. So this is the way of the dodo, and that's not that bad after all. But for completion's sake, I've put it in here. And you will have seen that I have covered my list here. See, Daffy, Bunny, and the piggy says so. But I've got one more thing. By the way, Colombo made that lineup, not Steve Jobs, for the record. Pinball machines. What we have here is the Williams security controller, which exists out of two parts. You have a controller chip which sits in the middle of all input and output and game code and power-ups and posts and whatever you want to call it. And it holds the game type. It says every game has a type number. Say your Terminator 2 is type number 300, your add-on assembly is number 305. It has the game type inside the chip. It says, okay, I'm an add-on assembly, I'm in number 305. And your ROM chip, which holds the code for the game, also says, hey, I'm number 305, I am an add-on assembly. Do we match? Yes. Okay, let's go. That's the idea here. Which means that if your add-on family dies, or it doesn't work anymore on your run, or you want to change it and say, well, okay, I have a new game which has a problem, and it's the same hardware platform. You can move PCBs from A to B. It's no problem. This chip will say, well, no, I am an add-on family. You are a, and this is a theater of magic. I will not work because, well, what it is, it's a spare parts carousel. The company says, well, we don't make enough money on our spare parts business. Let's put in something to make it people more difficult to just swap boards between games and revive them so we can make more money for our stockholders, which was at that time the management of the company. Now, important to know is that there is no encryption here on the software. It's all this special chip in the middle which causes all the issues. But with emulation we got around this. What you see here is a fake serial number typed into an emulator. What you would have is a game ID, 559, and a serial number. If the game ID wouldn't match, it would go an error. And with the serial number, the company could trace back the board to find the original importer who offended them and would no longer sell them any games. So, and the actual check is of does this type match with the security chip and the software is in the ROM chip. Now, if anybody has done some cracking on C64 or Amiga, you just mop it out. You go to the assembler code with your hex editor and say, you look for where the check is and you say comment, 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 comment. You reburn it to an EPROM and your problem has been resolved. You can also recreate these security chips. They have been electron microscope scanned and the schematics have been put on the internet years ago so we can recreate them. But not to forget that you still have to match with your CPU and your ROM, sorry, in order to get everything to work properly. And if you want, you have universal ROMs, but because the ROMs are game specific, it's a little bit stupid. And most of this was done with the oncoming of virtual pinball games and pinball emulation, because they couldn't get these games to work. They had to crack around it, and it has been flown back from the emulation into the real pinball world on this level. So where are we today with bootlegging? Well, it's the multi-game boards. You have the 4000 in one, the 60 in one, the 35 in one. You have the 150 in one slots. Everything is it all comes into illegal MAME emulation. Illegal MAME emulation because the license agreement of MAME says you cannot use it in a commercial product. Of course, nobody in China cares about that, which was topic one, the legality. Nobody cares. It all comes pretty much full circle. You have the 4000 in one game board, which you put into your Mortal Kombat cabinet, your Killer Instinct cabinet, and it will run 4000 games on a Chinese Windows 2000, and it will do it very, very happily. The error messages are spectacular when they look like you order a lumpia with fried rice. But they're fun. You have the vertical games. The 16-1 is actually quite popular product. Well, it puts MAME on an ARM core, and it emulates Z80 games. This is, in one board you have Pac-Man, Mrs. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Frogger, Gyros, whatever you want. Everything of more or less the same generation, early 80s, is in there. In one small board. It even holds a VGA output. It can take power from a PC power supply. It's very, very modular. And they really sell by the gazillions. Again, with illegal MAME on it. And the last one I've put in here is the Capcom collection. Capcom was a big user of suicide batteries. Every game they had a suicide battery in it on their CPS platform. CPS was the platform of their games. It's like their hardware model. And with all the decryption that was done, it was put into one single board, not encrypted, no longer suicide batteries. You can play any epic Street Fighter versus Mortal Kombat, whatever game you want, without a suicide battery. So that's today. And I didn't really make all of this up. I have references to prove it, that the Googles are with me. And as I said, I really suck at presentations, so if there are any questions, there's a lovely guy with a microphone in the back. And I'll be around all weekend. So, shoot. Oh, come on. I should have done this in Finnish. So anyway, if there are no questions, or you're afraid to ask them on Assembly TV, hello DFox, enjoy Mechanized Supremacy. Thank you.